Okay, guys, so now that we've practiced and we can place our numbers in scientific notation, so we can go from scientific notation into standard notation or back into scientific notation. So that's what you should be able to do up to this point. If you're still having trouble with placing a standard number into scientific notation or bringing scientific notation back into standard form, you need to make sure you remind me before moving on in this PowerPoint. All right, so if you can easily take a number from standard to scientific notation and back again, then you're ready for this next slide. So with chemistry, we are constantly dealing with adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And I don't want you to be so dependent on the calculator, because there are some times where it's simply easier to just quickly do it on paper. Okay, so I don't want you to be reliant on the calculator. Of course, your calculator, you can place it in scientific mode, scientific notation mode, and leave it, and it will do all the math for you. But I want you to be able to add and subtract using scientific notation. So we're going to go back to Algebra 1, where you learned how to deal with logarithms, because we're going to be doing logarithms throughout the course using our scientific notation, because if you look at the format of scientific notation, it is basically logs. All right, so we're going to review how we add and subtract with logs. All right, so we have the scientific notation of 5.19 times 10 to the third plus 3.14 times 10 to the 2. Now, when you're adding and subtracting, okay, adding and subtracting is very different than multiplication, because with adding and subtracting, the main thing you need to remember is that your base tens must match. Okay, so this is the big key here. When you're adding and subtracting, your tens have to match. So in order to do our additions, our tens either have to both be 10 to the third or 10 to the 2. It doesn't matter which one you pick. All right, you can make this guy look like 10 to the third, okay? Or you can do a different approach, and maybe you want to make this 10 to the 2. And it doesn't matter which approach you take, because you're going to get the same answer in the end. So let's talk about how we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pick the first number because it's the first, and I'm going to make that 10 to the 2. All right, so how do we do that? I've got to make this decimal place 10 to the 2. So if you remember, that means that this number here, 1.9 times 10 to the third, if I were to put it in standard form, right, I'm dealing with a bigger number, aren't I? Because it's a positive number. So when I move this decimal, it needs to be a big number. So that means I'm going to move the decimal in this direction to make my number a big number when it's at the end. All right, so I'm going to move the decimal 3 places. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to have to add a 0. So my standard form is going to be 5,190. Okay, you guys with me? All right, so when I have it in that form, okay, this is standard form, I want to only have to move the decimal 2 times. I only want to have the decimal moved 2 times. So if the decimal's right there, we're going to move it 2 times, so I have a base of 10 to the 2. So I'm going to move it 1, 2. So when I do that, I'm going to have 51.9 times 10 to the 2. Now, I know this does not meet the standard for being in scientific notation, because in order to be scientific notation, you're only allowed to have one number before the decimal place. I know that. So it's not in the correct scientific notation, but in order to be able to add the values, it needs to have matching pairs or base tens. All right, so now that I have matching base 10s, I can now add this. So 3.14 times 10 to the 2, and I'm going to line it up. And now I can simply carry out the multiplication. Now, when I do this, when you're adding and subtracting, you don't do anything with this. You just simply bring it down. So 10 to the 2. Okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the coefficients like I would regular addition. So this is going to be a 4. This is a 10. Carry the 1. So I'm going to get 5, 5. Okay? And I'm going to bring my decimal down to match. So there's my answer. Okay? 55.04 times 10 to the 2. Now, in chemistry, in order to report this number in scientific notation, I have to make it meet our standard. Now, remember, our standard is that there can only be one number in front of the decimal. So in order to make that match, I am going to move my decimal one place. Now, when I move my decimal one place, I must add it to the power. So I now have 5.504 times 10 to the third. Okay, so there's my answer. All right, let's take a look and see what it would look like if we're going to do some subtraction. Now with subtraction, we're going to approach it the exact same way. All right, everything's the same. So here you can see I have a base 10 of minus 3 and I have a base 10 of minus 5. It doesn't matter which one you pick. Okay, so I am going to pick this one just because it is the first one. Okay, so I need to change the base 10, which is a minus 3, to the 10 to the minus 5. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, and the easiest way to do this until you can start really seeing it is writing it out. So that minus 3 means I'm going to move the decimal in the direction that's going to give me a small number. So in order to make it a small number, I need to move it in that direction. So if I move it in that direction, so I move it 1, 2, so I'm going to have to add a 0, and then 3, add another 0. Okay, so there's my new number. So 0.00217. Now, one of the things you're going to notice a pattern, and that's a really good thing. If you can start noticing patterns, remember, science and math is all about a very predictable pattern. You can see the number of zeros that I always add is going to be one less than the power. Okay, so I added 2 decimals in front of the 2 because it's one less than the 3. All right, remember that minus and that plus only means, is it a big number when I'm finished or is it a small number when I finish? Okay, so that minus 3 tells me it's a small number when I finish, and this number right here in standard form is definitely a small number. Okay, so now that we have it so that we can match or have it in standard form, the next thing is we want to make the base have a minus 5. So that means we're going to move the decimal 5 places, okay? So we're going to go ahead and move it back 5 places. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's where my new decimal is. So now I have 217 with a point. Okay, you can add a 0 there. If you don't like to just have a number with a point, you can add the 0. If you don't really care, you can just leave it like that. It doesn't matter to me when you're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and add the 0 because I'm a type A person and I can't stand looking at a whole number with a decimal at the end. And that's just for me visual. It doesn't do any difference. And then I'm going to go ahead and make it match because I moved that decimal 5 places and this number was a small number, so it is a minus. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is line up my next number here, so 6.40, and I'm going to do a better job and be neater so we can see it. So I'm going to add a little space there. 10 to the minus 5. And we're going to subtract. Okay, so once we line everything up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to subtract. So just like before, this stays the same. We don't do anything with it other than bringing it down. Okay, all right, I'm going to put a placeholder here so we can do this. So 0 minus 0 is 0. Doing my borrowing. Line up my decimals. Remember, we're going to line them up. And we get 6, 0, 1, 2. Okay, so this is what I get. Now, again, because we're in a science class and whenever we're dealing with numbers in scientific notation, we must make it follow the scientific notation format. So that means we can only have this 2 and then the decimal. Okay, this has too many numbers in front of the decimal and we can't have that. So we need to make it match. So we're going to need to bring this decimal right here. Okay, now I moved it how many times? I moved it 1, 2, and I moved it in this direction, right? So if I moved it in this direction, that means that I'm going to take away, okay, I'm going to take away from the 5. So I'm going to minus 2. So now I'm going to get 2.1060 times 10 to the minus 3. Okay, there's my answer. All right, on the next couple slides, you're going to practice manipulating your powers. All right, you can use your calculator. Remember, you have your Wabbit calculator emulator on your desktop. So you can go ahead and use that if you'd like. I would like you to try it without the calculator first, and then I would like you to use the calculator to see if your answers match up. On the practice slides, you're going to write out your equations and your work just like I've done on my screen. You can use a finger or a stylus, and you just write on your screens, okay? All right.